Hey Vision Chasers, it's Dr. Bird here with a history lesson for you today. In the early 1930s, many Jews found it increasingly difficult and dangerous to live in Germany as Hitler and his Nazi party exercised control. In 1939, a little over 900 Jews boarded the SS St. Louis in hopes of going to Cuba to find sanctuary. Now, in this lesson, we're going to explore what they found once they reached Cuba. In order to fully tell the story, it's important to go back to November 9th and 10th of the previous year, 1938. Over those 2 days, there were numerous acts of violence and terrorism acted out against members of the Jewish community living in Germany. This was known altogether as Kristallnacht, or Night of the Broken Glass. And sadly, many Jews found it unaffordable to leave. Many wealthy Jews were able to get out quickly, but it actually costs money in order to purchase the proper paperwork in order to immigrate to another country. And at this time, the Nazi Party was making it difficult for Jews to earn a living so that they could afford to leave Germany. And sadly, at this time as well, many countries, including the United States, are closing their borders to immigration. So on May 13th, 1939, these 900 Jews board the SS St. Louis. And here you see a picture of friends and family waving goodbye to loved ones on board the SS St. Louis. Could you imagine the joy and sadness that these people aboard the SS St. Louis are feeling as they leave these friends and family members behind? So the ship would arrive in Havana, Cuba on May 27th, 1939. And these smiling faces on board this ship would soon turn to sadness and despair as they figure out what has been happening even before they got on the boat and as they're traveling across the ocean to what they believe is going to be safety. These Jewish refugees would never set foot on Cuban soil. The president of Cuba would actually turn against the Jewish people. There was a lot of anti-Jewish propaganda going around at the time, and as a matter of fact, many of the Cuban citizens were concerned that these Jewish refugees would end up taking their job. And so the Cuban citizens made it well known that they did not want the Jewish people in Cuba. So let's take a look at this timeline to fully understand this. So on May 5th, the Cuban president turns against these Jewish refugees and he decides that he does not want them in Cuba. On May 13th, the Jews board the SS St. Louis to head towards Cuba. So given that timeline, there's a lot of speculation that this was a scam in the first place that was perpetrated by members of the Cuban government, in addition to employees of the company that owned this ship, to take the money from these Jewish refugees, to get them to buy these landing permits to get on Cuban soil. And they knew that these landing permits would not mean anything to the Jewish people because the Cuban president had already turned against them. So while the captain is trying to smooth things over with the Cuban government, these refugees are having to wait on the ship. They're not allowed to leave the ship as it is docked. But unfortunately, all these attempts to get the Jews in Cuba failed. And so on June 2nd, the ship was ordered to leave. So the captain of this ship was friendly towards the Jews on board his ship, and he was determined to find a place, a safe place for them to go. And he decides to turn to the United States. And so he slowly starts to sail his ship to the United States to buy the time that they needed for the government of the United States and other countries to find a way to accept these Jews. So word is sent to Franklin Roosevelt, President Franklin Roosevelt at this time, and his response is nothing. In fact, there is no official word from Franklin Roosevelt regarding the Jews on board the SS St. Louis. Instead, the official position is the United States is going to stick to the immigration laws of 1924, which placed a quota or a limit on the number of immigrants that could come from certain parts of the world. And at this time, there were already a number of Jewish people fleeing Europe. And so that yearly quota or number had already been met, and there was a waiting list of thousands of Jewish people hoping to get to America. So the United States does not look good here. And it's important to mention that FDR is fully aware of the anti-Semitism sweeping the globe and in his own country as well. And he could have easily waived those quota limits with an executive order. It was within his authority to do so. And many other countries were aware of these Jews hoping to find sanctuary on board this ship. As a matter of fact, the Canadian Prime Minister became aware of this issue, and this is his response. He was, quote, emphatically opposed to the admission of the St. Louis passengers. He later went on to say, the admission of refugees perhaps posed a greater menace to Canada in 1938 than did Hitler. Another member of the Canadian government, who was the director of immigration, said that if these Jews were to find a home in Canada, they would likely be followed by other shiploads. No country could open its doors wide enough to take in hundreds of thousands of Jewish people who want to leave Europe. The line must be drawn somewhere. So remember, the ship left from Hamburg, Germany on May 13th, and these passengers have been on board this ship ever since then. And finally, on June 6th, the captain had no other choice but to head back to Europe. And you can imagine these passengers were extremely sad. Some ended up taking their own life. Some of the passengers considered mutiny and actually taking over the ship. There was also a plan to disable the ship to force the British government to rescue the passengers off the ship and bring them into Great Britain. So good news came on June 12th as the ship was reaching Europe when 4 countries, Great Britain, Belgium, the Netherlands, and France, each agreed to take a share of these refugees on board this ship. So the ship is going to dock in Antwerp, Belgium, and representatives from these 4 countries are going to retrieve their share of these refugees and take them back to their country. And once again, these passengers were happy. But sadly, 3 of the 4 countries, France, the Netherlands, and Belgium, were taken over by the Nazis, and it is estimated that roughly 240 of the about 907 passengers actually survived the Holocaust in the end. So I know that that's another sad chapter of world history, and that is what it is, and I encourage you to look into it a little bit more. In the description section, you'll find more information so you can get some more details about this situation. I also encourage you to download the worksheet that goes along with this video, and you can find it in the description section as well. If you like what we do here, if you like this channel, I encourage you to support us and help us launch the new and improved Vision Chasers website. And so there's going to be a couple links that you can find there in the description section of this video so that you can support this channel and help, like I said, help us launch that website. So that was a tough one, but I was really curious to know a little bit more, and so I learned as I was putting this together for you, and so I hope that that makes you even more curious to do some digging yourself to learn a little bit more. Well, that's it for today. I thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for supporting this channel and everything that Vision Chasers does. And so until we meet again, please keep chasing the vision. Bye.